So it's no surprise that the Canon EOS R films beautiful 4K footage. The only issue is, as you probably know, that it films that footage at a crop, which basically means instead of using all of the camera's big giant full frame sensor, it uses a smaller portion in the middle. And that actually ends up resulting in like a 1.7 times crop factor. And we could spend pretty much all day discussing whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or if Canon is crippling their cameras for some reason. And in fact, for about the past year, since the EOS R has come out, that's what people online have been doing, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. So whether the 4K crop is good or bad isn't really the issue here. The fact is, it is a feature in the camera and it's not changing, and any amount of arguing or discussion or whatever doesn't seem like it's gonna change that. So if we have this feature or this setting in our camera, is there a way to use it to our benefit? I've personally found the 4K crop to be a really useful feature, keeping in mind that I mostly film my videos using prime lenses and I pretty much record and distribute or deliver everything at 1080. And where the crop factor becomes helpful is the fact that it is a crop factor. If you're taking a 1080 image and you're trying to crop in on it and zoom in on it, you're just losing resolution. Sometimes, if you're just doing it a little bit, it doesn't really make a difference, but if you're really trying to zoom in on one specific part of the image, it can get pretty pixely and pretty ugly pretty quickly. And that is one of the huge benefits of filming at 4K but delivering at 1080, because you have 4 times the resolution. And even if you scale down 4K footage into a 1080 timeline, it looks really good because you've packed all that resolution into a smaller area. But on the other hand, if you have 4K footage on a 1080 timeline and you want to zoom in on it, you can basically go 4 times in without losing any resolution. So if something is filmed in 4K and you want to crop in, it's going to look just as clear. And that's true with any 4K footage, but where the crop factor comes in handy is when you actually do want to zoom in more. What I have found is that the lens I use most is my Sigma 24mm 1.4, but sometimes when I'm out filming, it just doesn't go quite far enough. And then I know if I just turn on 4K, it's going to crop in. So now instead of 24, I have something that's like, I don't know, let me see, what's 24 times 1.7?
The answer is 40.8.
So with 4K turned on, my 24mm lens suddenly becomes like a 40mm lens. And then when I'm editing at 1080, if I want to zoom in further on that 4K footage, which is basically 4 times the resolution of 1080, what is that? That's 40, what's 40 times 4? Is it 160?
That would be 160.
Now my 24mm lens is almost giving me the results of 160mm, and you can just sort of extrapolate that for other lenses. So if you're using a lens that goes 24 to 105 and you're at 105, suddenly it's like you're much, much closer. So for example, take this shot here. It's at 105mm using the full frame sensor at regular full definition 1080. As soon as I switch into 4K, you can see that 1.7mm crop and the effect that it has, even though the shot is still framed at 105mm. So that gives you a bit of a reference point for what that 1.7 times crop looks like in real life. But imagine there was some reason that I really wanted to get closer to that branch of the palm tree. I start out with my regular 1080 full frame sensor, and then I turn on 4K and immediately you see that 1.7 times crop factor. But then if I want to get closer while I'm editing, I can crop in basically 4 times without losing any resolution, and now I can get really close to that branch. So as you can imagine, that'd be really helpful in a wide variety of situations beyond just filming palm trees in their natural habitat. And of course, this isn't exactly the same thing as having a lens that actually zooms to those focal lengths, but when you're in a pinch, it really helps. Another way that I've been using the 1.7 times crop factor to my advantage is with overhead shots. I have my overhead rig here, which I put on this table and do a lot of overhead shots. I use the EOS R most of the time for those overhead shots, and I usually use a pretty wide lens with those shots so that you can see whatever I'm working on, you can see my hands, it's clear what I'm talking about. But sometimes I just need to get a little closer to this subject. So if I have the EOS R up here on the overhead rig filming at 4K, Not only is it clear, but I know that if something happens and there's a small detail of whatever I'm working on, whatever I'm doing over here, I can crop in on that. It's gonna help me to communicate my point more effectively. So for me personally, as someone who does most of my work at 1080, there have been very few, if any, times where I found myself wishing like, oh man, I wish the EOS R had full frame 4K. And there have been a lot of times just out in real world situations where I've been really happy to have that 1.7 times crop because it's going to help me get something that I'd have no way of getting otherwise. Of course, it would be awesome to have the option to use the full frame sensor at 4K and then crop in if you want to. That's kind of the best of both worlds. But for now, this is what we got. I'm not trying to be a Canon apologist. I'm just trying to say, if this is what we have and there's cool ways that we can use it that actually are helpful and beneficial, we might as well do that. All in all, the EOS R is a really fun camera to use, and the more I use it, the more I like it. I kind of find these little useful tricks that I wasn't super aware of when I first got it. I did put together a whole video of what I think are 5 underrated features of the EOS R, so I really recommend that you check that out so you can get a little bit more out of this super awesome camera.